All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the website. There's a lot of new updates, a lot of new graph types, and some cool examples that I wanted to go over. Let's see what we've got. All right. So just as a reminder for how to actually use this website, once you've used the Mind Monitor app to record a meditation session, you can save that CSV anywhere and then upload it here. Or you can use the examples that I've preloaded here. And I've added a new one from Kaio. Thank you, Kaio. This link goes to my original video. I think I might make a new one that just shows from an absolute beginner perspective how to actually use the website. But for the moment, I hope this is sufficient to be able to get going. Let me know if you have any trouble. Instead of loading, I'm going to just use the examples that I have. Let's just use a very simple one. So this is the best example that I can find for myself of a meditation session which seems to be pretty characteristic of what a lot of other people see. I think we're all pretty familiar now with this basic chart type, but well, I've had quite a few questions about what comes up initially. So let me explain why this chart is the first one to come up and what it is. So basically, whenever you upload a file, you'll always see this first chart type. I default it to these particular settings each time. So no matter what else you click on here, whenever you open a new file, it's going to default to this view, which is gamma waves, comparing left versus right, in this case TP10, which is the red one here, and TP9, and we're looking at the back, so these TP regions. I default to this because I find it so far the most useful for immediately seeing some dramatic changes, which I think we're most familiar with from various types of meditation. And what it tells you is how much the right side of our brains is paying attention, I suppose, over the left side. So gamma as a brainwave, I think one way to understand it is simply attention. And where gamma is strongest in the brain sort of gives you a sense of what we're paying attention to. If gamma is strongest on the right backside on TP10, then that seems to be a pretty clear indication of right brain activity. And if it's in the back, or the temporal parietal region, that does seem to be a region that many of us see increases in our meditation types, or in some cases decreases, depending on the type of meditation you're doing. Thanks to feedback from quite a few people, it looks to me like this particular chart is also useful for very highly concentrated types of meditation. So we're talking jhanas, we're talking even just more basically, if you're focusing on one part of your body, which could include the breath, if you're focusing on one particular thing and not the whole, speaking most broadly, then I think that will engage the left hemisphere more than the right. The left hemisphere is allows us to focus in on a target, while the right hemisphere allows us to take a step back. Both are important to be able to engage with reality, of course. We would be quite lost if we didn't have one or the other of those abilities. In general, I think most meditation methods that I think are more well, I'm actually not familiar with. I'm not sure what type of meditation we would all be more familiar with. I think concentration type meditation, focusing on particular part of the body or the breath or whatever, or a visualization. I think that's probably more well known. But the results of meditation, the classic results of meditation, where you're able to gain, I guess, perspective on life or perspective on your mind and body as a whole. That's really a classically right-brained activity. But then going back to the left brain, if if you achieve a very high state of concentration, that is probably a very left-brained activity. And if you achieve the kinds of famous states of meditation where things supposedly, this is far outside my tradition, where things like where your awareness of everything tends to fade and you're super focused on one particular part of one particular target of meditation, and then even that might disappear. That is an extremely rarefied state of meditation. That's probably an incredibly left brain activity. So in that case, that is, well, it's tremendously successful in terms of that particular tradition. Whereas success for a more right brain tradition would not involve those kinds of hard states where where awareness of surroundings drops away, that kind of thing. So long story short, I still think after all the feedback that I've gotten so far that this is still the best graph to start with. But it's really become more clear to me, even more than I suspected, that blue is just as valuable as red. Blue indicating more, perhaps, single-minded, single-pointedness, you could say. Red, more expansiveness. So really, it just depends on what you're trying to do. If you're really focused on if you're really focused on focus, then this chart is probably going to get more blue. If you're trying to open up into a more intuitive awareness, it's going to get more red. So there's a couple of there's even a possibility that I could flip these axes so that if you're trying to if you say like, yes, I'm going more for focus than expansiveness, you could potentially like flip this chart, and so up would be more in the direction of what you're trying to go towards, or maybe not. I think this is still the best view. And just to make it more clear, what exactly this is showing, this is a ratio. So up does not mean more gamma, stronger gamma. It doesn't actually mean that. It depends on where that gamma is. So, as I showed in my first tutorial, if we actually look at the absolute values, gamma looks like it's actually going down. So, the ratio shows you the comparison between gamma on TP10 and TP9. Absolute shows you the actual volume, you could say, of this particular gamma note. Blue, TP9, is going down, which is why the ratio is actually going up. I think everyone's probably somewhat familiar with that, but I'm going over it again because I've added some new relative and absolute charts. So I just wanted to refresh everyone's understanding of this. There is a potential this ratio does hide the total gamma power. So, and while I'm not as interested in total gamma power as in the ratio, that is still a helpful perspective. I think it does matter if gamma power is going up over time or down, and I'm still trying to understand how to add that. Okay, so let's see what. There's a lot to do. What do we do next? I think I have this cool analysis method, but let's get to that later. Instead, let's take a look at channels. This channel selector, I think this is new from the last video I made. It shows the same view that Mind Monitor did. For each position, each electrode, it just shows the total power of each band. Pretty basic, pretty easy. That's the first analysis that you have to do before doing any of the other types of analysis. This is step one. What is the power of each band at each electrode? The higher up it is, the stronger the band is. And again, you can think of it like volume. If alpha, beta, gamma, delta, if all of these are like notes, like musical notes, then on absolute charts, the higher up means more volume. So it's louder. It's literally louder in the brain. If we look at each channel, you can see some interesting differences. Sometimes some of the bands seem to be going up. In other cases, they seem to be going down. This is interesting, but I'm not really satisfied with this particular kind of analysis. I don't think it's particularly helpful. The entire reason I made this website was to be able to take a step farther from this really basic analysis into seeing what other types of insights we can get from what's going on here. So let's look at these other options. Instead of just absolute, we have relative. Now, this might be a little overwhelming. Let's choose TP10. So let's toggling between absolute and relative. It may look tremendously different, but it is showing the same data, just a different perspective. And I have to warn you, I'm calling this relative, and Mind Monitor website also has a relative option, but this is a little bit different. I should probably come up with a different name for it, but I actually still feel like this is the best. So what's going on here? You can see that all of these bands, even though there's a lot going on, they all start together. If we look at each channel, you notice they all begin together. That's because this relative chart is showing percent change from the original value, the value that it started out as. So let's take one band on one channel as an example. Okay, gamma on TP9. It's going down tremendously. What does that mean? Well, let's look at the absolute chart. You can see it's going down, although it's really not visible here. But that's the reason why I'm adding this relative chart, because we're trying to emphasize helpful details, right, that might not be visible on this basic chart. So you can see it's going down. Same with delta, I guess, at the beginning there. The relative chart shows how much each band changes from its starting value. So if this is going down, it says, looks like it ends up at negative 80%. That means that at the end of the session, gamma is 80% lower than when it started. If on a different channel it goes up, that means at this height here, gamma was 40% higher than when it started. Again, let's look at the absolute chart. You can see there's that bump there. Now, I like this relative chart because it really gives each band a chance to shine when it might not have the chance to in this more basic chart. It starts everything off on the same footing, and it treats any percent change as equal. So it really gives you a sense of what each band is doing without being hidden by perhaps bigger changes from other bands. I hope that makes sense. So I recommend this if you're really interested in what is changing over time for a particular channel. The absolute chart, I leave it there as an option, but I can't think of a single situation in which it might be the best one to look at. I do suggest relative if your goal is to figure out exactly how much the power of a particular band is changing at a particular location. Of course, it doesn't take into account any of the other channels. This is just one channel in isolation, which is a big limitation. But that's what the next option is for. So let's see. Anything else to say about this relative? Let's just take a look. So for this session, mindfulness, it appears that a lot of bands are There's a lot of downward motion here. You see, there's a lot happening here, which is really cool to see on this relative chart. That's not obvious. It's a little bit obvious on the absolute chart, but you can really see that there's something dramatic happening. See, that's really cool. Like, okay, so on the absolute chart, you can tell that these are going down, but on the relative chart, it really makes it clear that it's just these bands that are going down while gamma and beta are staying the same. That's helpful. I find that really helpful. Okay, so enough with the relative chart. Absolute and relative, I actually don't use very much. I recommend gravity chart. So this is very interesting, and this might take a bit more explanation. Before going into this, let's just review the position chart. I think it'll be easier to understand what this means if we look at the position charts first. So we'll come back to this. Well, first let's take a look at what the gravity chart looks like. You'll notice this isn't actually a bug. There really isn't any information for these channels, AF7 and AF8. And something going on in TP10, but mostly TP9. And actually, let's change to my insight example because this is more interesting for this particular analysis. So for TP9, not much going on. TP10, big gamma increase. And somewhat increase for the other bands. The other bands are here, but if they're below a certain value, then I hide them. And then nothing for AF7, AF8. Just nothing. Nothing going on there. So what does that mean? What on earth is going on here? And let's keep this in mind. Out of all the channels, the only change that is happening is gamma. That's the only thing that's going on in any of these channels from this particular view. So what does that mean? Let's look at the position chart. So let me explain the position chart again, because this is definitely confusing. I guess I still don't have a great metaphor, but if you can imagine that, well, first of all, this is your head, you could say, looking top down. So the front, I can put a little nose here, and then ears for right and left. You're looking down on the top, and wherever the dots are or lines are in this indicates where the most amount of that particular brainwave is. That doesn't mean that that's where the brainwave is focused in the brain, but it just means that's where the most amount of it, that's where the balance of it is. So if you can imagine like a table or something flat with a ball sitting on it, balanced, the ball in this case being gamma. Red is where it starts out. So in this case, very handy, it starts out in the middle. And then depending on how strong gamma is on the other locations, it's basically like a teeter-totter. And if you tip one way, because gamma is stronger on one side, then the ball is going to roll down in that direction. If each channel, TP9, 10, if all of these have the same gamma, even if it's very high, like high gamma, high gamma, high gamma, high gamma, because they're all equal, it'll still be in the middle, right? Because if you're perfectly level, then everything's balanced. You'll stay in the middle. But if one starts to gain more power than another, then that ball is going to roll, and that's what you're seeing here. And for all these charts, this is a rolling ball of where the balance is. This is actually a good view because anytime you see it lined up like this, front to back, that means that left and right have basically equal power. But front and back, there's something going on. So it's like it's tipping back and forth like this, not like this. There's the left and right's very stable, but something is going on front and back to change that center of balance. For gamma, you can see it starts out with all locations very balanced, but then it ends up very much back and right. So when you see this diagonal, and I've seen quite a few other people's charts that look like this, which is very encouraging. When you see when you see activity specifically in this, you could say like southwest region, that means very strong TP10 gamma, exclusively strong. So with that in mind, let's look back at the gravity charts for TP10. Remember how, so this is for TP10, gamma starts out very low, but it goes fairly high. That corresponds with this movement of gamma from being very balanced in with no particular overemphasis on one position or another. It starts out very balanced, but then becomes extremely TP10, extremely weighted towards TP10. So that's what this graph is showing, specifically for this location. And that's also why nothing else is going on these other channels. Because gamma is moving constantly in the direction of TP10, not in the direction of other locations. So that's what this particular gravity graph is emphasizing. It's essentially a way of visualizing this position chart exclusive to a single electrode, and also has all the other bands available so you can see them at the same time. It's sort of another way of being able to show all of these together at the same time, which is handy. You'll notice that delta, theta, all of these others, they're for some reason really focused, they're really balanced between front and back here. Really balanced. So that's why they're not showing up on this or any other chart. There's no one particular location where they're becoming really emphasized. So this may seem like a bit of a strange, oddly specific type of graph, but I'm letting the data guide me towards what graphs might be useful. And it does seem to me like this particular view could be a really great way to very cleanly see something interesting that might be happening. So for example, the absolute and relative charts, there's a lot going on here, very easy to get distracted. All the different charts, it's honestly a bit of a mess. It could take weeks to try to get through all this and to carefully consider everything. But if we're just looking at gravity, then suddenly our focus becomes extremely focused on this one view. It really filters out everything that is not interesting to this particular analysis and really brings to the surface a change that might be pretty significant. So let's take a look at some other charts. And actually, let's start with a not meditating example. Nothing going on in TP10, which is not surprising. I think a lot of us have meditation methods which increase power on TP10. So not meditating, as we'd hope, it would not show that. Although I have seen people post examples of non-meditating data, which shows quite a lot of activity on TP10. So I'm not sure what to make of that, and I'm going to have to rely on everyone with that type of data to be able to tell me what is significant to them. By keeping a close watch on it over time, and as practice develops, and as you have experiences which are valuable, legitimately valuable to you, you can tell me what that looks like. And that might drive different types of analysis, or it might help me to refine what is going on here. Or perhaps you just have very naturally high TP10 gamma activity, which I think is great. I think that's wonderful. So for me, not meditating, TP9 has quite a lot going on, which I think makes sense. Left brain activity, really common for focus. I think I was doing some work here. Gamma, so a lot of gamma going. So gamma as a way of understanding attention. It makes sense that it would be focused on this particular on the left hemisphere, gamma and beta. I think these are basically like attention waves. Just to make this really clear, let's look at the position charts, and you'll see You should be able to predict, if it's on TP9 and there's high gamma there and nothing else on any of the other charts, then you would expect gamma to be more weighted on the left side and left back. And sure enough, that's exactly what we see here. So I hope it's starting to come together what all these different charts mean and how they tie into each other. So yeah, for me, for how my brain works, this is pretty common for not meditating, and mindfulness starts to drag it to the right. Stronger, stronger sessions of meditation tend to make it more exclusively right. So there's this shift from left to right, and sometimes from front to back. Now let's check out. I added a couple more examples. I think I've gone over. I still want to get into the analysis, so I think we'll do that last. I think I've gone over the new chart types enough. So let me show you what is really interesting me at the moment. So I managed to capture a meditation session which involved a type of what some traditions call fruition, which is it's sort of like a peak experience in sort of stages of insight. It's I'm not sure I want to get into it very much, but it's if you have a lot of experience, you can sort of see when something interesting happens, and then when you're sort of over the hill and it's a moment has happened and now it's over. But it's something you've gained from, and they often tend to be not under control. So I finally was lucky enough to have to notice a moment that this was happening and to record it. And I'm very interested in the details, so I wanted to go over that. So again, very similar to the other session that we're looking at, TP9, AF7, AF8, nothing going on here. Again, TP10. This is where it happens for a lot of us. I wanted to toggle between this very interesting meditation session and insight. This insight, I've labeled it. This is what I find to be a very standard meditation for me. After a lot of momentum is built up, if I do a couple of sessions, if I keep it up over a few days, my recordings tend to look like this, where on TP10 there's an increase in gamma. So I was very interested to see that for this, what I evaluated in myself to be an even more interesting state. Not only is gamma high, but there's the other bands are now also participating. And what that means is if you look at the position charts, gamma, again, there it is, focused on, very, very highly focused in this on TP10. But in this case, the other bands are also shifted to the right here. So everything is now in this quadrant. All the band activity is focused back here. So it's like in previous meditations, the gamma as essentially a sign of attention would often show up here. It's perhaps the reason that I selected this session as being especially important to me is that the other bands then get dragged into this same perspective, and it's all very, very coherent, I suppose. I'm not sure how to describe this very well. Everything's working together in the same way, and that really makes sense to me. So to compare this with someone else, finally, let's look at Kaio. He donated his one of his sessions. Thank you, Kaio. And that allows us to compare these interesting states. So Kaio does a different meditation style than me, but there are some similarities. At least we've always suspected. And it's very interesting to me to be able to compare these two examples of what each of us say is sort of the peak example of from our particular traditions. I named them the same. I think that's just our evaluation of that. And there are some very interesting similarities and differences. So let's start with absolute power for channels. Okay, let's just scan through this. TP10 and TP9. Now AF7 and AF8, a lot more interesting. There's a lot going on here. There are some big spikes, and if you'll notice, which will be my immediate point soon, is that all bands are moving together here. Same with this. It's not just one that's going up. All bands are involved in this particular moment, which is what he identifies as the fruition moment. However, and actually, let's do this again, but with relative. Now, this is where relative charts are really helpful, because it looks like in each one there's this gamma increase. So you can see gamma increasing in each one of these, and under a relative perspective, then the change really becomes apparent. So that's one of the reasons why relative is more useful. It really brings out some of the changes. And yeah, so just wanted to point out, for each channel, there's a gamma increase. Gamma, 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 and then gamma's a bit hidden in here. That's important, but then let's look at gravity. Under the gravity charts, lot going on TP9, which is pretty common, and just in general for focus. But then TP10, which is where I always see all of my activity, nothing. Instead, Kaio has the big, a lot of activity in AF7 and AF8 front regions. So that's interesting. So that is an immediate difference between what we do. It looks like Kaio's method is very much engages the front half of the brain, while my method engages the back. And especially, it looks like AF7, which is front left. There is some interesting activity here, but it looks like the majority of the exclusive activity happens front left location. And I've seen this from a couple other people in the community, actually, where the more concentration-based traditions do seem to be front left, which is very interesting. My methods for analyzing this don't really have a great way of dealing with that at the moment. I'm thinking of different ways to be able to highlight that. Let's take a look at the position charts. Very interesting how he starts out in the back, but then there's these moments of very strong front left activity, and you can see how each one, most of these have those big spikes occur in these moments. And I see that from other people too. I see, especially Jhana. It looks to me like Jhana practices engage this region too. And then one last point. Notice how it's not just one band that's increasing. There's multiple going on at the same time. I think that might be really important. Instead of just gamma increasing, there's this coordinated, synchronized increase. If we compare with my version on TP10, again, there's multiple bands involved in this increase. It seems like something interesting happens when multiple bands become exclusively focused in one particular region. And I'm not sure that I can say more than that. I think that's as much as I can really analyze right now. And I think I might create some new charts that really emphasize when multiple bands are working together, some sort of band coherence. But now it's getting confusing. Analyzing these has given me a bit of a headache because there's so much going on. All right, now finally, let's take a look at this analysis feature that I've added. So the point of this is to try to take a stab at what different to label different meditative states based on data, which is of course difficult and maybe a little dangerous. It's hard to say. I do see similarities between people and between my own sessions, but this is very early stages. Still, I wanted to give it a shot. So what I have so far is this method where instead of labeling each particular meditation state, I try to give it symbology, which tries to be helpful and tries not to overprivilege one state over another, because it's all useful, of course. Might even try to name it like meditation type A, type B, something along those lines. For the moment, I'm using phases of the moon. So the more left regions are more the moon if it's really left, then there'll be a new moon, and then it goes all the way up to full moon. Let's see if I have some other examples here. With a star being when the regions are especially high, although I'm getting ahead of myself, I think. Yeah, let's just start with mindfulness. So this is what I consider to be a very common chart type, at least if you're trying to do insight work. You start out very left-brained and end up being, I would say, balanced. So I really want to highlight what this particular chart type, this particular result, where you have this fluctuating above and below the one-to-one equal axis here, and the range, the gray region where it shows the full range of data, also is just in general above and below the line. I call this half moon because both sides of our brain are participating equally, and I think that is a great state of mind to be in, regardless. Now, of course, the more left brain types, that can be a sign of intense concentration, which has its own value. When these charts get more above the line, that can be more expansive, which has its own value. Let's see if I have another example. So, for example, with not meditating, here's a good new moon example where it's there's an intensely left brain. Now, I was really focused on work, I think, at this moment. So this is a great sign of focus. And I like the new moon symbology for this because focus types meditation will, one of the interesting experiences of that is having your surroundings fade and you become single pointed, and even to the extent that you might be able to make awareness, make a sense of self disappear, in some higher stages. And so I like the new moon symbology for that because it's like an extinguishing, which is a very, very common word in Buddhism. And then, yeah, even with just everyday activity, a balanced approach between the hemispheres is common, which is what you would expect. We have two hemispheres for a region, and so we have two hemispheres for a reason. So if you're engaged in everyday activities, I think a balanced approach is probably, I think that makes sense. For mindfulness, I think I started out in a very focused state of mind, but there's good and bad aspects to all states of mind, right? After a long day of work, the intense focus tends to take on a mind of its own, and it's not a very pleasant state to be in. Sometimes it can be a bit too focused, not engaged. And so it really depends. If a particular mind state is too stuck, then in this case mindfulness was the right approach for me. And regaining a sense of balance where there's some red and some blue was a great result in this particular situation. Now for insight, This is one of the reasons why I'm adding this analysis option, because there's a big difference between what you see here and what you see here. And it's not just in terms of height. You'll see I want you to focus on look at the full range here. The full range has above and below the 1-to-1 axis, which means that the right brain is contributing, the left brain is contributing. They're handing off power, which is perfectly normal. But what's interesting about these states of mind is that the right brain is really dominant. Not only is the right brain consistently strong here, consistently dominant here, but there aren't even moments where it dips back into the left brain for regulation. If there were, then this gray region would extend down below the axis. So there's a variety of ways that I could color this. I could even make it darker if the range becomes consistently right. But I've chosen the star symbol to indicate when that happens, and just to emphasize when that goes on. And it'll be the same for the left brain as well, although I'm not sure I have a good example of that. If you have the same situation but flipped, so the very blue region and the range stays below the x-axis the entire time, then that's its own special state of mind, which deserves to be highlighted. And also, if there is this type of event where that Kaio and I have identified where multiple bands are responding in synchrony, it seems, and that is also indicated. So this is another good example. You see, so this is Kaio's chart for his example of fruition, but you notice there's nothing that is really dramatic going on here. The drama all happens when you look at total power or other regions, where you see a sudden shift from right to left in the front, and then also from back to front on both sides. So there's a lot going on there, and this is just a good example that this particular chart, this default chart that I've made, is not always the best option in order to analyze what is going on. I personally like it as a first view, and sure enough, it does show a general increase from left to right brain power. But I added this, in this analysis, it does take into account that in other perspectives, there's something dramatic going on here, and it highlights that as the star here, so that you can, so that that important point is not lost here. And so that's generally my approach here. This type of analysis is going to change a lot as I find different ways to do this, but basically, all these different charts could contribute to what this analysis says. It's not just this chart, although at the moment, for the most part, these will follow what this chart looks like. But as I learn more, as I hear from more of you about what the peak experiences look like, then that will inform me about how to indicate that here. And I might show it differently too. I might show it like a list of possible states as they match other people's examples. So basically, I need to keep looking at the examples everyone's provided, and please keep posting examples of states that are particularly valuable to you. And the more I see of those, the better I'll be able to add those into the model, so that no matter what chart you're looking at, those important states can be highlighted, even if they're not particularly obvious on one chart or another, if that makes sense. All right, that's everything for now. Thank you so much for all your feedback. Working on quite a bit more to show you soon. I'm even working on an Android app, which hopefully will replace the Mind Monitor we're using. Although Mind Monitor still works great, but I do have some other things in the pipeline that I'll be showing you soon.